Blaster fire echoed through the air as Commander Yarek ducked behind the crumbling wall, his pulse racing. The Valdoran rebels were relentless, their towering forms closing in through the smoke and dust. Yarek gritted his teeth, gripping his weapon tightly, his eyes scanning for his target. He had been waiting for this moment, for the chance to strike back after everything the Valdorans had taken from him. He spotted the Valdoran commander, Kairos, the one responsible for the attack on Nika Prime, the one who had killed Ambassador Naera Dren. Rage flared in Yarek's chest. His blood boiled at the memory of Naera's lifeless body, lying in the wreckage of the diplomatic shuttle. She had been his friend, his ally, and now all that was left was vengeance. Without hesitation, Yarek burst from cover, his blaster aimed directly at Kairos. The Valdoran turned, his glowing eyes widening in surprise as Yarek fired, the shot hitting him squarely in the chest. Kairos stumbled back, his alien armor smoldering from the blast. For a brief moment, Yarek felt a surge of grim satisfaction, but then the ground beneath him trembled, and everything changed. 3 days earlier. The tension in the briefing room on Terra Station was palpable. Commander Yarek stood at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the grim faces of the council members. Across from him sat Ambassador Naera Dren, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of concern. The news from Nekar Prime had been bad, very bad. The Valdorans are pushing harder than we anticipated, Yarek said, his voice steady despite the growing pressure. They're laying claim to resource-rich planets on the fringes of Terran space, and we've already seen minor skirmishes. If this escalates any further, we'll be in a full-scale war. Naera frowned, folding her hands in front of her. We've maintained peace with the Valdorans for decades. They're not a species to engage in conflict lightly. Why the sudden aggression? That's what we're trying to figure out, Yarek replied. But we've intercepted communications that suggest a radical faction within the Valdoran leadership, one that's far more hostile toward the Terrans. Before anyone could respond, the heavy doors of the briefing room slid open, and an imposing figure entered. The room fell silent as Arek Seros, the Serukian representative, walked in. The Serukians rarely attended Terran meetings, preferring to keep their distance, but Arek's presence now carried a weight that everyone in the room could feel. Without preamble, Yarek spoke, his deep voice reverberating through the room. I bring a warning from the Serukian High Council. You must not engage the Valdorans in open conflict. The Terrans exchanged confused glances, but Naera spoke first. With respect, Representative Seros, the Valdorans are provoking us. If we don't act, we risk losing key planets. Arek's expression remained impassive. It is not a matter of territory. It is a matter of cosmic balance. You do not kill Terrans. The consequences of breaking this rule would be catastrophic. The room fell into stunned silence. Yarek's brow furrowed as he leaned forward. What are you talking about? Arek's dark eyes swept over the room, and for the first time, Yarek saw something in them that unsettled him. Fear. The Serukians have safeguarded the balance of the galaxy for millennia. You humans, you are connected to the fabric of reality in ways you do not yet understand. If a Terran life is taken in this conflict, it will not just be the loss of a diplomat or soldier. It will be the beginning of a collapse, a chain reaction that will affect every corner of the galaxy. Yarek's heart pounded in his chest, but his practical mind struggled to grasp the enormity of what Yarek was saying. So you're telling us that if one Terran dies in this conflict, the entire galaxy is at risk? Yarek nodded slowly. Yes, the Cindari, the ancient ones, left behind a system, a test. It is a test of humanity's worthiness, one that determines whether or not your species can maintain peace and stability in the galaxy. The killing of a Terran will activate the Cindari's test, and once it begins, there is no stopping it. Naera's eyes widened, but she remained composed. Why have we never been told this before? Arek's gaze shifted to her. Because it has never been necessary, until now. Back on the battlefield, Yarek stood over the fallen Valdoran commander, Kairos, his breathing heavy. He had avenged Naera, but the ground beneath him continued to tremble. His comm unit crackled to life, and a voice came through, panic clear in its tone. Commander Yarek, something's happening. The planet's destabilizing. We're picking up anomalies across the entire sector. Yarek's blood ran cold as the reality of Arek's warning sank in. He had killed in vengeance, and now the consequences were unfolding before his eyes. The catastrophe had begun. Yarek stood frozen as the tremors grew stronger beneath his feet. The Valdoran rebel camp, moments ago a scene of brutal conflict, was now being torn apart by the very ground it stood on. Massive cracks split through the earth, swallowing entire structures, and the sky above flickered like a malfunctioning holoprojector. The atmosphere seemed to ripple, as if the very air had become unstable. Yarek couldn't believe what he was seeing. It wasn't just a local event. It was as though reality itself was unraveling. The rest of his squad scrambled for cover, shouting into their comms as they tried to make sense of the chaos. Yarek's mind raced back to the briefing, to Arxeros's grave warning, "You don't kill Terrans. The consequences will be catastrophic." But how could this be happening? How could the death of one person, one diplomat, have triggered such a massive collapse? Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the static of his comm unit. "Yarek? Commander Yarek! Do you copy?" It was Lieutenant Tessa Vaughn, his second in command. She was still at the Terran outpost on Naka Prime, overseeing the evacuation efforts. "I copy, Vaughn," Yarek replied, his voice strained. "What the hell is happening?" "There's no time to explain fully," Vaughn said, her tone urgent. "But something is happening to the entire planet. We're detecting gravitational anomalies, and the atmosphere is destabilizing. We need to get out of here. Now!" Yarek glanced around at the crumbling landscape, his jaw clenched. He had led his team into this conflict, and now the consequences were spiraling far beyond his control. "Evacuate immediately," he ordered. "Get as many people off the planet as you can." "I'm trying, sir," Vaughn replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "But the anomalies are affecting our ship's systems. We can't take off until the atmospheric interference stabilizes." Yarek cursed under his breath. His mind was spinning with the impossibility of it all. This wasn't just a planetary disaster. It felt like a cosmic event, as if the laws of physics were being rewritten before his eyes. Behind him, the surviving Valdoran rebels were fleeing, their panic matching that of Yarek's squad. Kiros's body lay forgotten in the chaos, a grim reminder of the price they had all paid. Yarek couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of something much larger, much worse. "Commander!" Vaughn's voice cut through the calm again, this time more urgent. "I've just received a transmission from Terra Station. The Serukians have requested immediate contact." Yarek's chest tightened. The Serukians, of course, they knew this would happen. They had warned them. He took a deep breath and spoke into his comm. "Patch them through." Moments later, the cold, familiar voice of Arxeros filled his earpiece. "Commander Yarek," Arek said, his tone flat, yet carrying a weight of finality. "It has begun." Yarek's stomach churned. "What the hell is this? Seros? What's happening to Neka Prime?" "This is only the beginning," Arek replied calmly. "The killing of a Terran in conflict has activated the ancient test left by the Cindari. The destabilization you are witnessing is spreading. It will consume Neka Prime, and soon it will spread across the galaxy." Yarek's grip on his weapon tightened. "What can we do to stop it?" There was a pause before Arek spoke again, his voice grim. "You cannot stop it, but there may be a way to reverse it, if you act quickly." Yarek glanced at the crumbling horizon, his mind racing. "Tell me what we need to do." Arek's voice grew softer, almost sorrowful. "The test was designed to measure humanity's ability to maintain peace. By taking a life in vengeance, you have triggered the unraveling of the fabric of reality itself. The Cindari system is ancient, but it can still be reset if you reach the core of the destabilization." "And where is that?" Yarek asked, his heart pounding. "The galactic core," Yarek replied. "Deep in the heart of the galaxy lies the Cindari's control mechanism. It is the only way to reverse the test." Yarek closed his eyes, his mind whirling with the enormity of the task before him. He had triggered this catastrophe, and now it was up to him to stop it. But could they even reach the galactic core before it was too late? The Valdorans won't stop, Yarek muttered. They'll escalate this. You must convince them to stop, Yarek said. Otherwise, the galaxy will fall apart before you even reach the core. Yarek opened his eyes, watching as the Valdoran rebels continued to flee, unaware of the larger danger they had unleashed. Convincing them to lay down arms seemed impossible, but if they didn't stop fighting, the consequences would be far worse than any war they could wage. Fine, Yarek said, determination settling into his voice. We'll reach the core, but we'll need help. Yarek's voice was distant, as though he were considering the gravity of Yarek's words. The Serukians will assist you, but the path will not be easy. Yarek nodded to himself, already feeling the weight of the mission ahead. He motioned to his team to regroup, his gaze falling on the fractured land around them. This was no longer about vengeance. This was about survival. We'll make it, Yarek said quietly, more to himself than to Eric. We have to. The line went dead, and Yarek turned to face his team. The ground continued to tremble, and the sky was now a distorted swirl of colors, as if the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. We're heading to the galactic core, Yarek announced, his voice steady despite the chaos. And we're going to stop this. The stars outside the ship's viewports flickered in and out of existence, as if the galaxy itself was beginning to blink away. Commander Yarek stood at the bridge of the Dauntless, watching the distorted space ahead of them as they hurtled toward the galactic core. Every second felt heavier, the weight of their mission pressing down on him. The universe was coming apart, and every Terran and Valdoran life hung in the balance. The Valdoran fleet had agreed to a temporary ceasefire after Yarek's desperate plea, but the tension between the two species was palpable. Both sides knew that if the mission failed, it wouldn't matter who had won the skirmishes. The galaxy would fall apart, and they would all be erased. Behind Yarek, Lieutenant Tessa Vaughn was coordinating the crew, issuing rapid orders as they prepared for the final leg of the journey. How long until we reach the core? Yarek asked, his voice tight. Tessa glanced at the readouts. 2 hours. Commander, if the anomalies don't get worse. Yarek clenched his fists. Every passing moment, the cosmic disruptions were intensifying. The space around them was warping, and gravitational shifts made navigating through the stars a nightmare. Ships were disappearing, falling into sudden voids of nothingness, and entire star systems were being swallowed by unexplainable phenomena. The galaxy was unraveling faster than they could travel. Sir, Tessa called out, breaking his train of thought. Incoming transmission from the Serukians. Yarek turned toward the console as Arixeros's face flickered onto the screen. The Serukian representative's expression was more severe than usual, his dark eyes reflecting the seriousness of the situation. Commander Yarek, Yarek began, I have new information. The anomalies are converging toward the galactic core. The Cindari's test has been fully activated. Yarek's jaw tightened. What does that mean for us? The core is destabilizing rapidly, Yarek explained, his tone measured but urgent. By the time you arrive, the core will be on the verge of collapse. If you cannot reset the Cindari mechanism before then, the entire galaxy will fall into a cascading chain reaction of dimensional breakdowns. Yarek cursed under his breath. It was worse than they thought. He glanced back at Tessa, who was listening intently. What do we need to do once we reach the core? He asked, trying to stay focused. The mechanism must be activated by a Terran, Yarek said. It was designed that way. The Cindari left this safeguard in place, knowing that only humans have the unique biological connection to the fabric of reality. You are tied to the cosmic balance in ways no other species is. Yarek raised an eyebrow. So, this test was designed to judge whether humanity is capable of maintaining peace. And if we fail, the galaxy collapses. Yarek nodded. The test is ancient, but it still holds power over the fate of the universe. The Cindari were wise, but their methods were harsh. They believed that if humanity could not control its own impulses, it was better for the universe to be reset. Yarek felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. The weight of the entire galaxy's fate rested on humanity's ability to control its own worst instincts. He had been part of that failure when he allowed vengeance to cloud his judgment. Now, the consequences were unraveling the very fabric of space-time. "We'll get there," Yarek said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We'll stop this." Urek's gaze softened, and for the first time, Yarek saw something close to sympathy in the Serukian's eyes. "I hope you do. Commander, for all our sakes." The transmission ended, and Yarek turned back to Tessa, his mind racing with 100 different thoughts. "Double-check our course," he said, his voice firm. "We can't afford any mistakes." Tessa nodded, already scanning the navigational data. "I've got it, sir. We're on the most stable path through the anomalies, but things are getting worse. I'm detecting more disruptions up ahead." Yarek ran a hand through his hair, trying to keep his emotions in check. He couldn't afford to lose focus now, not when they were so close. But as the ship barreled toward the galactic core, the tension gnawed at him. What if they were too late? Suddenly, the ship jolted violently, throwing Yarek and Tessa off balance. Red lights flashed on the control panel, and alarms blared throughout the ship. "What the hell was that?" Yarek shouted as he regained his footing. Tessa's fingers flew over the controls, her face pale. "Massive gravitational anomaly, just ahead of us. We're being pulled off course." Yarek's heart pounded in his chest. "Can we stabilize?" Tessa shook her head, her voice strained. "Not with the current power output. We need to reroute auxiliary power to the engines, or we'll be sucked in." Yarek made a quick decision. "Do it. We can't afford to lose time." Tessa worked swiftly, redirecting the ship's power to the engines. The ship groaned under the strain as it fought against the pull of the anomaly. Yarek gripped the edge of the console, watching as the stars outside twisted and warped around them. After a few agonizing moments, the ship broke free, stabilizing as it resumed its course toward the core. "Status report," Yarek ordered, his voice tight. Tessa exhaled in relief, her hands still trembling slightly from the close call. "We're back on course, but we've lost some time. We're down to 1 hour until we reach the core." Yarek nodded grimly. "Keep us on course, Lieutenant. We're almost there." He turned away from the control panel and stared out into the twisted, flickering void of space. The weight of what they were about to do, of what they had to prevent, pressed down on him like a physical force. They were heading straight into the heart of the Cindari's test. A test that could either save the galaxy or destroy it. And the final burden of resetting the mechanism would fall on him, on humanity. Failure was not an option. The Dauntless shuddered as it entered the region surrounding the galactic core. The once familiar stars were now distant memories, replaced by an abyss of flickering light and crackling energy. The closer they came to the heart of the galaxy, the more warped and unstable everything became. Space itself seemed to bend and ripple around the ship, as if reality was on the verge of tearing apart. Yarek stood at the helm, staring at the massive structure that loomed ahead. It was like nothing he had ever seen. A colossal, ancient mechanism suspended in the void, its surface glowing with an eerie, pulsating light. The Cindari's control mechanism. This was it, the key to saving the galaxy or allowing it to collapse. "We've arrived at the core," Lieutenant Tessa Vaughn said, her voice tense. "But the gravitational anomalies are spiking. We don't have much time before this entire region becomes too unstable." Yarek nodded, his heart racing. "Prep the landing team. We're going in." The ship's landing bay was a flurry of activity as Yarek, Tessa, and a small squad of Terran soldiers prepared for their descent to the core mechanism. They had been briefed on what to expect, but the reality of the situation was still sinking in. The fate of the galaxy was in their hands, and every second counted. As they boarded the shuttle, Yarek couldn't help but glance at Tessa. She had been by his side through it all. The battle on Nekar Prime, the pursuit of the Serukian warning, and now this final mission. He could see the same fear and determination in her eyes that he felt in his own heart. "Let's do this," she said, her voice steady, despite the weight of the moment. The shuttle launched from the Dauntless and made its way toward the core. The closer they got, the more intense the gravitational distortions became. The shuttle shook violently as it descended, and the tension in the cabin was palpable. But Yarek kept his focus on the goal, the mechanism that could either reset the galaxy's balance or destroy it entirely. The shuttle touched down with a jarring thud, and the doors hissed open. Yarek led the team out onto the platform that stretched before the core mechanism. The air was thick with energy, and the ground beneath them seemed to hum with the power of the ancient structure. The mechanism was massive, a complex network of glowing pillars, spinning orbs, and shifting patterns of light. It pulsed with energy, as if alive, waiting for the final command to determine the fate of everything. "This is it," Yarek muttered, his voice almost drowned out by the low, constant hum of the mechanism. "Let's move." As they approached, the structure responded to their presence. The pillars shifted, revealing a central console, a small, ancient device with symbols etched across its surface. This was the heart of the Cindari's test. Yarek stepped forward, but before he could reach the console, an enormous ripple of energy surged through the platform, knocking him off balance. The air around them shimmered, and suddenly the figures of the Serukian representative, Arik Seros, and a group of Valdoran soldiers materialized out of the distortion. "Commander Yarek," Arik called out, his voice strained. "The Valdorans have arrived. They refuse to acknowledge the ceasefire." Yarek's heart sank as the Valdoran soldiers, weapons drawn, advanced toward the core mechanism. "We can't let them interfere," he muttered to Tessa, who had already drawn her blaster. The situation was spiraling out of control. The Valdorans had come to destroy, their leader, Kairos, having fallen at Yarek's hand earlier. Their actions now could doom everything. Yarek had to stop them, but the clock was ticking. If the mechanism wasn't activated soon, the galaxy would be lost. "We'll hold them off," Tessa shouted, firing her blaster as the first wave of Valdoran soldiers charged. Yarek turned to Arik. "You need to help us stop them." Arik nodded grimly. "The Serukians will do what is necessary." As the two sides clashed, Yarek knew that he couldn't wait any longer. The fighting around him blurred into background noise as he made a run for the console, dodging the blast of energy and gunfire that filled the air. His mind was focused on one thing: resetting the Cindari test. He reached the console and placed his hands on its smooth surface. The ancient symbols glowed beneath his touch. And for a moment, nothing happened. Then, the platform beneath him trembled, and the mechanism came to life. The pulsing energy around the core intensified, and the gravitational distortions that had been tearing at the galaxy began to stabilize. Yarek felt a surge of hope. Maybe they could still do this. But then, something unexpected happened. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the air. It wasn't coming from the Serukians or the Valdorans. It was coming from the core mechanism itself. "Terran, you have triggered the test." Yarek froze, his hand still on the console. The voice was calm, yet filled with immense power, as if the very galaxy was speaking to him. "The fate of your species and the universe rests in your hands. Are you worthy of survival?" Yarek's throat tightened. This was it, the final test. Everything the Cindari had set in motion had led to this moment. If he failed, the galaxy would collapse. But if he succeeded, he could restore balance. "I'm ready," Yarek whispered, his voice barely audible. The symbols on the console flared brighter, and Yarek felt the mechanism's energy surge through him. It was overwhelming. He could feel the weight of the universe pressing down on him, testing him, pushing him to his limits. His thoughts were consumed by the memories of everything that had led him to this point. The death of Nara, the Serukian warning, the battles, the chaos. But at the core of it all, he understood what had to be done. Yarek took a deep breath and pressed down on the final symbol. The energy around the core exploded outward, engulfing everything in a blinding flash of light. He felt the universe shudder as the Cindari mechanism reset the cosmic balance. The chaos around them stopped. The platform was still. The galaxy was still. Yarek opened his eyes. The core mechanism was silent, its energy drained, its task complete. The Valdorans had stopped their assault, standing frozen in shock. The Serukians were silent. "It's done," Yarek said, his voice hoarse. Tessa ran up to him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You did it?" she whispered. Yarek nodded. though he felt the weight of what had just happened. The universe had been saved, but at what cost? Eric Seros approached, his expression solemn. The Cindari's test has been passed. Humanity has proven its worthiness. Yarek looked at the Serukian representative, then at the stars above. The galaxy was whole again, but nothing would ever be the same. We've survived, Yarek said softly. But now we have to live with what we've learned. As they prepared to return to the Dauntless, Yarek couldn't shake the feeling that the Cindari's test had been only the beginning. The universe had been saved, but humanity's true challenge was just beginning. This is the ending of the story. Thank you for listening. Please comment your favorite part or ideas for the next story. If you enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe for more. Stay tuned for more space and sci-fi exploration.